The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Harold Thompson carefully parked his old blue Buick in front of Jenny's diner at exactly 7 o'clock a.m., just like he had done every day for the past 30 years. The 93-year-old veteran slowly made his way to the entrance, his wooden cane tapping softly against the concrete. The bell above the door chimed as Harold pushed it open, and the warm smell of fresh coffee and bacon wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. Sarah, the morning waitress who had been working there for over 15 years, looked up from wiping the counter and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. The usual spot is waiting for you," she called out cheerfully. Harold nodded with a gentle smile, his wrinkled face brightening slightly. His usual spot was the corner booth by the window, where the morning light was perfect for reading his newspaper without straining his eyes. The diner was quiet at this hour, just the way Harold liked it. A few truckers sat at the counter, focused on their breakfast plates, while soft country music played from the old jukebox in the corner. The checkered floor gleamed from its early morning cleaning, and the red vinyl booths seemed to glow in the dawn light. As Harold settled into his booth, his joints creaking slightly, Sarah was already approaching with his regular order, black coffee in his special cup, the one with a small chip on the handle that he'd been using for years, and 2 slices of wheat toast, barely buttered, just the way he preferred. "Here you go, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, placing his breakfast carefully on the table. "Would you like to hear today's specials?" Harold shook his head slowly, a kind smile crossing his weathered face. "No thank you, dear. This is perfect, just like always." His voice was soft but clear, carrying the weight of years of stories untold. As he unfolded his newspaper, his hands trembled slightly, a reminder of the years that had passed. The front page showed stories about modern problems that seemed so far removed from his own experiences in World War II. Harold adjusted his reading glasses, which sat somewhat crookedly on his nose, and began his daily routine of reading every single article, starting from the front page and working his way to the back. Other regular customers who came to Jenny's diner knew Mr. Thompson's routine well. They would wave quietly as they passed his booth, careful not to disturb his reading. The younger waitresses had been told by Sarah about his service in the war, and they treated him with special respect, keeping his coffee cup filled without him having to ask. Time seemed to move differently in Harold's corner of the diner. While the world outside rushed by with its cars and smartphones, his small space remained peaceful and unchanged. He would occasionally pause his reading to look out the window, watching people hurry past, remembering a time when life moved at a slower pace. On this particular morning, Harold noticed his reflection in the window, his white hair neatly combed, his plaid shirt pressed and tucked in, his veteran's pin proudly displayed on his collar. He wore the same style of clothes he had worn for decades, comfortable but dignified, like a man who believed in presenting himself properly no matter his age. The other customers found comfort in his presence. To them, Harold Thompson was as much a part of Jenny's diner as the old photographs on the walls or the smell of fresh pie that wafted from the kitchen every afternoon. He represented something constant in their ever-changing world, a living reminder of a generation that had sacrificed so much for their country. As the morning progressed, Harold slowly sipped his coffee, carefully turned the pages of his newspaper, and occasionally made small notes in the margins with a pencil he kept in his shirt pocket. He had no idea that this peaceful morning routine, which he had followed for so many years, was about to face an unexpected disruption that would change everything. The clock on the diner wall ticked steadily towards 9 a.m., and Harold remained in his quiet corner, unaware that his carefully ordered world was about to collide with a very different kind of morning crowd, one that would challenge the peace he had come to cherish in his beloved diner. The peaceful morning routine at Jenny's diner changed dramatically one spring Tuesday when the first sounds of roaring motorcycles filled the quiet street. The noise was so loud that Harold's coffee cup rattled slightly on its saucer, and several customers looked up from their meals with concern. Through the large front windows, everyone could see 5 large motorcycles pulling into the parking lot. Their chrome parts sparkled in the morning sun, but there was nothing friendly about the way they took up 3 parking spaces each. The riders, members of a group calling themselves the Road Warriors, climbed off their bikes with an air of ownership that made several regular customers shift uncomfortably in their seats. The bell above the door chimed aggressively as the bikers pushed their way inside. They were dressed in black leather jackets covered in patches, heavy boots that thudded against the clean floor, and chains that jingled with every step. Their leader, a tall man with a thick beard and tattoos covering his neck, scanned the diner like he was sizing up territory. Sarah, the waitress, gripped her coffee pot tighter as the group of bikers made their way through the diner. They passed right by Harold's quiet corner, and one of them deliberately bumped his table, causing his carefully arranged newspaper to slip onto the floor. "Oops," said the biker with a mocking laugh, making no move to help pick up the fallen paper. "Didn't see you there, old-timer." Harold said nothing, but slowly bent down to retrieve his newspaper, his joints protesting the movement. The group of bikers took over the booths surrounding Harold's corner, spreading out more than necessary and speaking loudly about their latest road trips and encounters. "5 coffees, sweetheart," the leader called out to Sarah, who hurried over with a forced smile. "And make it quick. We're not as patient as Grandpa over there." He jerked his thumb toward Harold, causing his friends to snicker. The peaceful atmosphere of the diner had vanished. The regular customers finished their meals quickly and left, throwing sympathetic glances at Harold, who continued reading his paper as if nothing had changed. But his hands shook more than usual as he turned the pages, and his coffee remained mostly untouched. The bikers ordered large breakfasts and ate noisily, throwing bits of food at each other and making crude jokes. Every few minutes, one of them would make a loud comment about retirement homes or early bird specials, clearly aimed at Harold. Sarah tried her best to maintain order, but even her usually cheerful demeanor was strained. She watched helplessly as the bikers dropped food on the floor and left their tables in complete disarray. Jenny, the diner's owner, emerged from the kitchen with a worried look on her face, but seemed unsure how to handle the situation. "Hey, old-timer," one of the younger bikers called out to Harold. "Isn't it time for your afternoon nap? Some of us would like to enjoy our breakfast without looking at your sad face." Harold carefully folded his newspaper and placed it beside his coffee cup. His movements were deliberate and dignified, despite the taunts. The morning sun caught the veteran's pin on his collar, making it shine briefly, but none of the bikers seemed to notice or care about this small symbol of sacrifice. Before leaving, Harold placed his usual payment on the table, along with his regular tip for Sarah. As he stood up, using his cane for support, the bikers made exaggerated snoring sounds. He walked slowly past their tables, his back straight despite his age, showing no reaction to their childish behavior. "Same time tomorrow, Mr. Thompson," Sarah called out, her voice carrying a note of concern. Harold paused at the door and nodded, his expression unreadable. The bikers watched him leave with smug satisfaction, unaware that they had just challenged a man who had faced far worse than leather-clad bullies in his lifetime. As Harold's Buick pulled away from the diner, the road warriors high-fived each other, pleased with their new morning entertainment. They had no idea that this quiet, elderly man they had chosen to torment would soon shock them to their core. For now, they simply claimed their victory, spreading out even further across their booths, making plans to return the next day for more fun. Over the next 3 weeks, the situation at Jenny's diner grew worse with each passing day. The road warriors had made it their mission to arrive exactly when Harold was halfway through his morning newspaper. Their motorcycles would roar into the parking lot at 8:15 a.m. like clockwork, disrupting the peaceful morning atmosphere. On this particular morning, they seemed more determined than ever to make Harold uncomfortable. The spring air was turning warmer, but inside the diner, the atmosphere was ice cold. Sarah watched with growing concern as the bikers took their usual positions around Harold's booth, their leather jackets creaking as they slid into their seats. "Look who's still here," the gang's leader, who called himself Snake, announced loudly. "I thought maybe you finally found a nice retirement home, old man." His friends laughed on cue, the sound echoing off the diner's walls. Harold's hands trembled more noticeably now as he tried to hold his newspaper steady. The coffee in his cup rippled every time one of the bikers deliberately bumped his table, which happened more and more frequently. Small brown stains had begun appearing on his daily crossword puzzle, evidence of their accidental jostling. The regular customers had almost completely abandoned the morning hours. The few who still came in would quickly grab their coffee to go, throwing apologetic glances at Harold. Jenny, the diner's owner, had called the police twice, but the bikers were always on their best behavior when the officers showed up, and there was little that could be done. "Hey, Pops," one of the younger bikers called out, reaching over to Harold's table and snatching his newspaper. "Let me help you with that crossword. 5 letters for ancient. How about Harold?" The group burst into laughter as the young man crumpled the sports section and tossed it onto the floor. Sarah, who had been watching from behind the counter, rushed over with a fresh newspaper. "Here, Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, placing it beside his coffee cup. The bikers mock-clapped at her gesture. "Our hero waitress," Snake sneered. "Always taking care of the senior citizens. Hey, sweetheart, why don't you bring us some real food instead, and make it snappy this time?" Harold's morning ritual had become a test of endurance. His toast grew cold as he tried to eat between their interruptions. His coffee cup remained mostly full, as drinking it steadily had become impossible with their constant table bumping. Yet he continued to come, every single morning, refusing to let them drive him away from his routine of 30 years. The situation reached a new low when one of the bikers, pretending to stretch, knocked Harold's cane from where it rested against his booth. The wooden cane clattered to the floor, sliding several feet away. The group of bikers roared with laughter, making no move to help as Harold slowly began to rise from his seat. "Oh no, looks like Grandpa dropped something," Snake said with fake concern. "Better be careful bending down at your age. Wouldn't want to break a hip." Sarah started forward to help, but before she could reach the cane, another biker kicked it further away, sending it spinning across the checkered floor. The veteran's pin on Harold's collar caught the morning light as he steadied himself against the table, his face showing no emotion despite the cruel game. Jenny emerged from the kitchen, her face red with anger. "That's enough," she called out, but her voice shook slightly. The bikers ignored her, too focused on their entertainment. "What's wrong, old-timer?" one of them taunted. "Can't keep track of your belongings. Maybe it's time for a nurse to take care of you." The diner had grown completely silent except for the bikers' laughter. The few remaining customers watched in helpless anger as Harold stood there, one hand on his table for balance. The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting his white hair and the dignified set of his shoulders despite the humiliation. But something was different about Harold's expression this morning. Perhaps it was the way his eyes had hardened, or how his jaw had set firmly. After 3 weeks of constant harassment, something in the old veteran's demeanor had changed. The bikers, caught up in their cruel game, failed to notice that their target's usual patience had finally reached its limit. The diner remained silent as Harold Thompson stood at his table, looking down at his cane lying across the checkered floor. For the first time in 3 weeks, something had shifted in the old veteran's eyes. The usual gentle, tired look was replaced by something harder, something that seemed to come from a different time in his life. Snake, the leader of the Road Warriors, was still laughing as he nudged one of his fellow bikers. "Maybe we should call an ambulance now, save some time." The rest of the gang joined in the laughter, but it died quickly when Harold straightened his back and turned to face them. In that moment, the 93-year-old seemed to grow taller, his shoulders squared, and despite his age, an unexpected authority filled his presence. Sarah, who had worked at the diner for 15 years, had never seen this side of the quiet old man who read his newspaper every morning. "Young man," Harold spoke, his voice clear and strong, no trace of shake or weakness. "Would you be kind enough to pick up my cane?" Snake looked surprised at the direct command in Harold's voice, but recovered quickly with a sneer. "And why should I do that, Grandpa? Your arm's broken as well as your legs." Harold's next words came out measured and calm, but they carried a weight that made everyone in the diner lean forward to listen. "Because," he said, "in about 5 minutes, you're going to wish you had shown more respect to your elders." The biker gang exchanged glances, more amused than concerned. One of them started to make another joke, but Snake held up his hand, suddenly interested in this new development. The old man had never spoken back before. "Is that a threat, old-timer?" Snake asked, standing up to his full height, his leather jacket creaking as he moved. At 6 feet 2 inches, he towered over Harold, but the elderly veteran didn't flinch. "No, son," Harold replied, reaching slowly into his jacket pocket. "It's not a threat. It's a chance for you to make a better choice than the ones you've been making." Jenny, the diner's owner, had her phone ready to call the police. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, her coffee pot forgotten in her hand. The few remaining customers watched the scene unfold, worried for the elderly man's safety, but unable to look away. "A better choice?" Snake laughed, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice now. "And what happens if we don't make this better choice you're talking about?" Harold's hand remained in his jacket pocket as he spoke again, his voice carrying across the silent diner. "Then I'll have to make a phone call I've been avoiding for the past 3 weeks. And believe me, young man, you don't want me to make that call." One of the younger bikers, trying to impress his leader, stood up suddenly and took a step toward Harold. "Listen here, you old." "Sit down," Harold commanded, and something in his tone made the young biker obey instantly, surprising even himself as he sank back into his seat. Snake's face darkened with anger at seeing one of his men take orders from the old man. He took 2 threatening steps toward Harold, his boots heavy on the diner floor. "Who you think you are?" Harold finally pulled his hand from his pocket, but instead of a phone, he held something that made Snake stop in his tracks. It wasn't a weapon or anything threatening. It was an old, worn leather wallet. "Before I show you what's in this wallet," Harold said calmly, "I want to give you one last chance. Pick up my cane, apologize to these good people for disrupting their morning peace for the past 3 weeks, and we can all go back to enjoying our breakfast." The diner had grown so quiet that the only sound was the soft buzzing of the overhead lights and the distant sizzle of the grill in the kitchen. Every eye was fixed on the old wallet in Harold's steady hands. Snake looked at the wallet, then at his gang members, then back at Harold. Pride and curiosity warred on his face as he stood there, trying to decide how to handle this unexpected challenge to his authority. Finally, with a mocking smile, he made his choice. "Show us what you got, old man. This better be good." Harold's weathered hands opened the old leather wallet with careful precision. The morning sunlight streaming through Jenny's diner's windows caught the edge of something metallic inside, but it wasn't money or a credit card that he pulled out. Instead, he removed a worn, leather-bound identification card that looked older than most of the bikers in the room. "Before I show you this," Harold said, his voice carrying a strength that seemed to grow with each word, "let me tell you a story about a young Marine who served in Force Recon during World War II. A Marine who jumped out of planes behind enemy lines, who fought in battles that never made it into your history books." Snake crossed his arms, trying to look unimpressed, but his eyes remained fixed on Harold's hands. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. When that Marine came home, Harold continued, he found that civilian life was too quiet, too ordinary. So in 1948, he and a group of other veterans did something that changed motorcycle culture forever. He paused, looking directly at Snake. They founded the Hells Angels. The silence in the diner suddenly became electric. Sarah nearly dropped her coffee pot, and Jenny's mouth fell open. The younger bikers looked confused, but Snake's face had gone pale. Every serious biker knew the significance of that year, 1948. "You're lying," Snake said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "There's no way." Harold held up the ID card, its leather surface cracked with age but still clearly legible. There, alongside a black and white photo of a young, handsome Marine, was the name Harold Hurricane Thompson and the original Hells Angels charter member number, 006. "I helped establish 3 chapters across the country," Harold said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the silent diner. "San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Chicago. They used to call me Hurricane Harold because of how fast I could take a turn on my old Harley-Davidson WLA, the same bike I rode in the war." Snake's hands were trembling now as he reached for the ID card. Harold handed it to him carefully, watching as the biker gang leader examined it with growing amazement. The other road warriors crowded around their leader, their faces showing a mixture of shock and awe. But you're just an old man who reads newspapers," one of the younger bikers stammered, his earlier bravado completely gone. Harold smiled, and for a moment, everyone could see the shadow of the young Marine and legendary biker he had once been. "Son, I've forgotten more about motorcycles and brotherhood than you've ever known. I helped write the original code that all real bikers are supposed to follow: respect, loyalty, and honor." Snake suddenly straightened up and did something that shocked his fellow gang members. He snapped to attention, holding the ID card back to Harold with both hands, treating it like a precious artifact. "Sir," Snake said, his voice thick with emotion, "I had a grandfather who used to talk about Hurricane Harold. He said you were the fastest rider on the West Coast, that you helped write the original club constitution. He had an old photo of you on his wall." Harold took back his ID and carefully returned it to his wallet. What was your grandfather's name, son? Frank Speedy Martinez, Snake replied, his tough guy persona completely forgotten. A warm smile spread across Harold's face. Speedy? Good old Speedy Martinez. He was one of the best riders I ever knew. Saved my life once in a bar fight in Oakland. Harold's eyes twinkled with the memory. Is he still with us? No, sir. Snake answered, his head bowed. He passed 5 years ago. That's a shame, Harold said softly. He was a good man who understood what it meant to be a real biker. The diner remained absolutely silent as Harold slowly bent down and picked up his own cane, refusing help from the now eager bikers who stepped forward. When he straightened up, he looked at each member of the Road Warriors in turn. Now, he said, his voice carrying both authority and kindness, would anyone like to hear some stories about how we started the most famous motorcycle club in history? About what brotherhood really means? The bikers scrambled to make space in their booth, treating Harold with the kind of respect usually reserved for royalty. Even Jenny and Sarah stood still, realizing they were about to hear stories that had never been written in any history book. Snake carefully pulled out his phone. Sir, would it be okay if I called some of our other members? They're never going to believe who we found having breakfast at Jenny's Diner. Within an hour, Jenny's Diner had transformed into something that looked more like a biker convention. News of Hurricane Harold's presence had spread like wildfire through the local motorcycle community. The parking lot was now filled with bikes of all kinds, their chrome gleaming in the late morning sun. Snake, who had made several urgent phone calls, stood guard at Harold's booth, acting more like a personal security detail than the bully he had been just hours ago. Every few minutes, more bikers would arrive, their faces filled with disbelief and excitement as they entered the diner. Sir, Snake said respectfully to Harold, holding his phone, I've got Big Mike from the Thunder Riders chapter on the line. He says his father rode with you in 52. Would you mind speaking with him? Harold's eyes lit up at the mention of the year. Ah, 52. That would be Lightning Larry's boy? He asked, taking the phone. The gathered bikers listened in amazement as Harold recalled details about rides and events from over 70 years ago with perfect clarity. Sarah moved through the crowded diner, refilling coffee cups and taking orders, still trying to process the complete change in atmosphere. The same men who had been tormenting Harold earlier were now hanging on his every word, treating him like a living legend. It's true about the Constitution, Harold was saying to the captivated crowd. We wrote it in a small diner not too different from this one. 7 pages of rules about respect, brotherhood, and loyalty. He paused, looking pointedly at some of the younger riders. Nothing in there about harassing elderly veterans or frightening honest business owners. Several of the road warriors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces reddening with shame. One of them, the youngest who had kicked Harold's cane earlier, stepped forward with his head bowed. Sir, we had no idea who you were. I'm really sorry about your cane and everything else. His voice trembled slightly. My dad would kill me if he knew I'd disrespected a founding member. Harold looked at the young man thoughtfully. What's your name, son? Tommy, sir. Tommy Watson. Well, Tommy Watson, it shouldn't matter who I was or what I did 50 years ago. Respect isn't just for legends or leaders, it's for everyone. That's what we tried to teach back then. Harold's voice carried across the now silent diner. Being a true biker isn't about looking tough or making others feel small. It's about brotherhood, helping those in need, and standing up for what's right. Snake, who had been taking notes on his phone, suddenly looked up with excitement. Sir, I just got confirmation from the national chapter. They want to do a special ceremony honoring you this weekend. They're sending representatives from 3 states. The news caused a stir among the gathered bikers. Harold raised his eyebrows in surprise. That's not necessary, he began, but was interrupted by Jenny, who had emerged from the kitchen with determination on her face. Yes, it is necessary, Mr. Thompson, she said firmly. And we're hosting it right here at the diner. Free coffee and breakfast for every biker who comes to honor you. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Harold's weathered face broke into a warm smile. Sarah noticed that his hands weren't trembling anymore as he reached for his coffee cup. The fear and tension of the past weeks had been replaced by something unexpected, a sense of belonging. One of the older bikers who had just arrived approached Harold's table with reverence. In his hands, he held a faded photograph. Sir, This is you in San Francisco, 1949. My uncle kept it all these years. Would you? Would you sign it? As Harold examined the old photograph, his eyes misted over slightly. There he was, young and strong, sitting on his beloved Harley, surrounded by the original members. I remember this day, he said softly. We had just finished a charity run for the Children's Hospital. The diner had become a place of storytelling and reconciliation. The Road Warriors, once the source of fear and disruption, now acted as Harold's honorary guard, making sure he was comfortable and that his coffee cup stayed full. They listened intently as he shared tales of the golden age of motorcycle clubs, of brotherhood forged on the open road, and of the true meaning of biker culture. Snake looked around at the transformed atmosphere of the diner and leaned in close to Harold. Sir, would it be okay if we made this your official headquarters? We'd be honored to make sure you never have to worry about reading your morning paper in peace again. The following week at Jenny's diner looked nothing like the tense mornings of the past month. Harold Thompson arrived at his usual time of 7:00 a.m., but now his entrance was met with a different kind of welcome. Two members of the Road Warriors would be waiting outside, standing at attention as he parked his blue Buick. Good morning, Hurricane, sir. They would greet him, one quickly moving to open the diner's door while the other carefully carried his newspaper and helped him with his cane. The respect in their voices was genuine, nothing like the forced politeness they had shown other customers in the past. Inside the diner, Harold's corner booth had been transformed. The bikers had pooled their money to install a small brass plaque that read, Reserved. Hurricane Harold Thompson, founding member, Force Recon Marine, American hero. The vinyl seats had been reupholstered in premium leather, and a soft cushion appeared mysteriously one morning to make his usual spot more comfortable. Sarah couldn't help smiling as she watched Snake, the once intimidating leader of the Road Warriors, fuss over Harold's coffee temperature. Is it warm enough, sir? I can ask Jenny to brew a fresh pot if you prefer. Harold looked up from his newspaper with amusement. The coffee's fine, son. Though I wouldn't mind hearing the rest of that story about your grandfather Speedy and the Oakland run of 51. The transformation went beyond just the morning routine. The Road Warriors had appointed themselves as Harold's unofficial honor guard. They took turns ensuring that at least two members were always present during his breakfast hours. More surprisingly, they had started helping around the diner, fixing the wobbly tables, replacing burnt-out light bulbs, and even repainting the exterior on weekends. Jenny watched in amazement as her once troubled diner became a respected gathering place for bikers from all over the state. But these weren't the rowdy troublemakers of before. These were men and women who came to pay their respects to a living legend and learn about the true spirit of motorcycle culture. One morning, Tommy, the youngest Road Warrior who had once kicked Harold's cane, approached the veterans' table with nervous excitement. Sir, I restored an old Harley-Davidson Dually, just like the one you rode in the war. Would you consider taking a look at it? Harold's eyes lit up with interest. Bring it around tomorrow, son. Those bikes have some tricks to them that aren't in any manual. I'll show you what I learned back in 45. The other bikers gathered around as Harold began sharing stories about his wartime experiences with the legendary motorcycle. His hands moved animatedly as he explained the modifications they had made for military use, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had lived the history others only read about. The regular customers who had been scared away by the previous trouble slowly returned, finding a completely different atmosphere. The bikers would politely make way for families with children, help elderly patrons with their trays, and maintain a respectful volume during busy hours. Sarah overheard Snake giving strict instructions to some new Road Warriors one morning. Remember, this is Hurricane's place. We show respect not just to him, but to everyone who walks through that door. That's what real bikers do. Harold's influence extended beyond just behavior. He began teaching the younger riders about motorcycle history and maintenance. Every morning after finishing his newspaper, he would hold what the bikers jokingly called Hurricane's History Hour, sharing stories and lessons from the early days of motorcycle clubs. You see, he explained one morning, spreading out some old photographs on his table, these clubs were started by veterans who understood brotherhood. We looked out for each other, helped our communities, and stood up for what was right. The Road Warriors listened intently, many taking notes on their phones. The stories of charity runs, community service, and brotherhood resonated deeply with them. Slowly but surely, they began organizing their own charitable events, starting with a fundraiser for the local veterans' home. Jenny approached Harold one quiet afternoon, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know how to thank you. You've not just saved my diner, you've created something special here." Harold smiled, looking around at the transformed space that had been his morning sanctuary for 30 years. The sound of respectful conversation filled the air, mixed with the occasional rumble of motorcycles arriving or departing. On the walls, alongside the diner's old photos, new pictures had appeared. Harold with various biker groups, all proud to be photographed with the legendary Hurricane. "No thanks needed, Jenny," he replied softly. "Sometimes people just need a reminder of who they can be." 2 years passed, and Jenny's Diner had become more than just a restaurant. It had transformed into a living museum of motorcycle culture, with Hurricane Harold Thompson as its heart and soul. Every morning, without fail, the 95-year-old veteran would arrive at his usual time, greeted by a new generation of respectful bikers who had learned the true meaning of brotherhood under his guidance. On this particular autumn morning, something was different. Harold hadn't arrived at his usual time of 7 a.m. Snake, now the president of the Reformed Road Warriors Charity Club, felt a deep concern as he watched the minutes tick by. By 7:30, he made a call to Harold's home number, but there was no answer. "I'm going to check on him," Snake announced to the worried faces in the diner. But before he could leave, Harold's grandson Michael walked through the door, his eyes red and his voice shaking. "He went peacefully in his sleep last night," Michael told the stunned crowd. He was reading his favorite book about the history of motorcycle clubs, and he had a smile on his face. The news spread through the biker community like a wave of silence. Within hours, hundreds of motorcycles began arriving at Jenny's Diner. They came from all directions, clubs from 3 states, riders who had never met Harold but knew his legend, and even some elderly members who had ridden with him in the early days. Sarah stood behind the counter, wiping tears as she looked at Harold's empty booth. The brass plaque gleamed in the morning light, and someone had placed a single red rose on the table. Jenny had closed the diner for regular business, opening it only for those coming to pay their respects. Snake stood up on one of the tables, his voice thick with emotion. Hurricane Harold Thompson wasn't just a founding member of the most famous motorcycle club in history. He was a teacher, a mentor, and a true American hero. He taught us that being a biker isn't about being tough or scary. It's about brotherhood, respect, and helping others. Tommy, who had become one of Harold's closest students, stepped forward with an announcement. "The Road Warriors Charity Club has made a decision. We're establishing the Hurricane Harold Memorial Scholarship. Every year, we'll pay for one veteran's child to go to college. It's what he would have wanted." The gathered bikers nodded in approval. Many shared stories about how Harold had changed their lives. One spoke about how Harold had helped him restore his father's old motorcycle. Another remembered how Harold had talked him out of quitting his job, sharing wisdom from his own life experiences. Jenny wiped her eyes as she revealed her own tribute. "We're renaming the diner," she announced. "From now on, this will be Hurricane's place. His booth will remain exactly as it is, open only for veterans who need a quiet place to read their morning paper." The most touching moment came when Snake unveiled a large photograph they had taken just a month earlier. It showed Harold sitting on Tommy's restored Harley-Davidson Bullied, surrounded by members of various motorcycle clubs. Despite his age, his eyes sparkled with the same spirit that had earned him the nickname Hurricane all those years ago. "This photo will hang right above his booth," Snake declared. "So every morning, you'll still be watching over us, making sure we remember what he taught us about respect and brotherhood." As the day turned to evening, the bikers organized one final tribute. Hundreds of motorcycles lined up outside Jenny's Diner, their headlights illuminating the darkening sky. At exactly 7 p.m., Harold's breakfast time, they started their engines in unison. The roar of hundreds of motorcycles filled the air, not in a show of intimidation as it had been 2 years ago, but as a salute to a man who had changed their lives. The Road Warriors, once feared troublemakers, now stood as pillars of the community. Their leather jackets bore a new patch, a hurricane symbol with the words respect, honor, brotherhood, the values Harold had taught them. Sarah placed a fresh cup of black coffee on Harold's empty table, just as she had done every morning for so many years. "Goodbye, Mr. Thompson," she whispered. "Thank you for showing us that it's never too late to make a difference." As the sun set on that autumn day, the legend of Hurricane Harold lived on not just in the stories of motorcycle history, but in the changed hearts and actions of every biker who had been fortunate enough to meet the quiet old veteran who had transformed their lives with wisdom, dignity, and unshakable courage.